So the question, therefore, we need to ask ourselves is this: will I continue to sow? And this is in response to the one who said, when the results do not match my expectations, I've done all that is required of me, then do I give up and do I give in? The Lord is saying, do not give up, do not give in, do what you have to do. Another parable, which also is a parable of hope, is the next parable, and the third and last parable in Mark's parable discourse, which is the parable of the mustard seed. Now, even though Jesus says here, the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds, in other words, it is the smallest of all seeds. However, today, there are seeds which are smaller than the mustard seed. However, at that time, the understanding was it is the smallest of all seeds on the earth. Yet, when it is sown, it becomes not even the greatest of shrubs. The point which is being made here is not so much of the mustard seed, but the point which is being made here is the comparison of the mustard seed with the mustard shrub. So an internal comparison more than an external comparison. So Jesus is not comparing so much the mustard seed to other seeds, but comparing the mustard seed to the mustard shrub. This is the point of the comparison which is being made. And so very clearly, it is not so much what he's talking about. And in the Gospel of Mark, notice, Mark very correctly says that the birds of the air make nests in the shade of the mustard shrub. Matthew, of course, likes to exaggerate. And so Matthew says, the birds of the air make their nests in its branches. Now, the mustard shrub would grow till about 8 feet or so, and so very unlikely that the birds would make their nests so low. Mark speaks about the fact that the shade of the mustard seed is so much, of the mustard shrub is so much, that the birds of the air can even make their nest in its shade. So what is the point which is being made in this parable? The point being made is this: that the kingdom of God comes very unobtrusively. The kingdom of God comes very insignificantly. The kingdom of God comes without expectation, comes when we least expect it. The kingdom of God, when compared with other kingdoms of the world, seems so small. And yet, when it grows, in comparison with the beginning, the growth will be enormous. This is what the parable of the mustard seed is saying. So do not worry about the slow growth. The growth is definite. When Mark tells us that Jesus spoke with many such parables, what he means is this: first, that he is not narrating all the parables that Jesus told, and second, he's also telling us that Jesus had a similar teaching, was giving a similar teaching to the people. That means a teaching of hope, a teaching of not giving up, a teaching which said that even though things might not seem as significant now, they will become significant a little later. And when he says he did not speak to them except in parables, what he means is that there was a parabolic character to all of the teaching of Jesus. That is, the teaching of Jesus was dialogical. It involved the listener, so that it was not Jesus who forced the lesson down a person's throat or forced a person to accept the lesson. It was dialogical. The person who listened would supply the lesson. It seems to me that the next incident of the storm on the lake, which follows immediately after the parable discourse, is a parable in action that Mark wants to relate this incident, this miracle, if you like, or this mighty work, if you like, to the parable discourse is now made clear here. Notice, on that day, if you go through the Gospel of Mark, what you realize is this, that after chapter 4, verses 13 onwards, Jesus seems to be talking to his disciples because he's explaining the parable to his disciples. If you look at chapter 4, verses 21 to 25, the audience does not seem to have changed because Mark says he said to them. If you look at Mark 4:26, again Mark will say there, he also said when he talks about the seed growing secretly, and Mark begins in a similar way, which he also said when Jesus is talking about the mustard seed. And suddenly, in chapter 4, verse 35, now Mark speaks about the crowd. So notice the crowd comes into the picture, even though the crowd seems to have disappeared all along when Jesus was explaining privately to his disciples. And however, because Mark wants to link it, what he says here, notice, on that day. So on that day, that means the same day as Jesus told the parables. This is Mark's way of linking this incident with the parable discourse. So Jesus leaves the crowd and they go in the boat. So now when Mark says that they left the crowd, Mark is telling us that now the crowd is away and Jesus is with the disciples. So we notice that Mark seems to refer here to the crowd basically of chapter 4, verse 1. Because after this, Mark does not mention the crowd until this time now, when the crowd is reintroduced in chapter 4, verse 33. So reinforces that this miracle, like I said, this mighty work must be interpreted in the context of the parable discourse, because this incident is seen as a conclusion to what Mark had said in the parable discourse of Jesus. Other boats were with him. These other boats, however, disappear after this, and no mention is made of the other boats. Now, in the next verses, Mark contrasts the attitude of Jesus, who is serene, with the attitude of the disciples. And this is what I meant when I said that this is a parable in action. Jesus is in the same boat and is in the same storm as the disciples. It is not as if Jesus is in a boat which is more sturdy. The boat in which Jesus was, from the description of the boats at that time, seems to have been able to accommodate about 15 individuals, 15 persons. So it was big enough to accommodate 15 persons in that boat. This is the kind of boat which Jesus is in. However, the disciples and Jesus are in the same boat, and they're not on different seas. They're in the same storm. And yet, in this storm, and even as they are in the same boat, the response, however, is markedly different. Jesus is asleep. The disciples are awake. And even though Jesus is asleep, he is not only serene and calm because he is asleep. He is serene and calm because he has done all that is required of him. He can do nothing else except his agitation can rock the boat even further, which the disciples are doing. So the agitation of the disciples results in knocking the boat even further, and the disciples are not aware of that. So in a storm, the best response is to remain as calm as possible, because one can do nothing about the storm. So Jesus is aware of this. And you notice how Jesus is now living out what he said in the parables. Especially in the second parable, when he has done all that is required. Now you sleep. When it's time to sleep, you sleep. But because the disciples, even though they are insiders, have not really paid attention, they have not really understood the parable of the sower and the seed growing secretly and the mustard seed, their response is to get agitated. And in their agitation, they accuse Jesus. They make an accusation. The Markan disciples say, "Master, do you not care we are perishing?" So they attribute to Jesus a non-caring attitude and their own perception of their future. Their conclusion of their future is that they are going to perish. They're going to be destroyed. So already, a very negative tone. This is because things do not happen the way they expect them to happen. Now, we sometimes might tend to get as negative when things do not happen the way we expect it. Now, notice the first thing is this, that all of us are in the same storm, the storm of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, we are in different boats. There are some who are in cruise ships. These are the ones who can talk about their exercise routine. They can talk about when the gym is going to be opened. They can talk about their diet because they have got so many choices to make. They can talk about going to the mall and going to the theater and beginning this shooting and beginning that shooting. They can talk about that. They are the ones who are in cruise ships. So their attention, their focus is this kind of life. There are others who are in catamarans. When will the malls be open so I can go and have a tummy tuck? I can go and have my hair done. I can go and have my nails done. Those are the ones in catamarans. There are the larger majority in dingies, together, living in chawls. There is no chance of any kind of physical distancing, and a better term to social distancing is physical distancing. We must physically distance, but must distance in no other way except physically now. But in these chawls, in these bastis, there is no way you can physically distance because there are common toilets, there are common bathrooms. How to physically distance? And there are others who are in rafts. Our own countrymen and women in rafts. And many of those who are in these rafts or on these rafts have no paddle. So we are in the same storm, but in different boats. If you and I are able to be online at this time, if you are doing a course in theology at this time, rather than having to work like so many of your companions who are lay men and women are doing, then you and I are in catamarans. So we are in the second type of my four-type distinction. We are the privileged middle and upper middle class. Because who else? Take a young man of your age. Take a young man of your age and ask whether that young man, and I'm sure you've got many companions, what is their concern? Their concern now is the loss of job. Their concern is that they have been made redundant. The concern is they have applied to 100 places and there has been no response. Their concern is their savings are depleted. Their concern is, where is the next meal going to come from? Their concern is, what am I going to do? Their concern is, I'm spending 4 hours traveling every day, and when I come back at night after another 4 hours of travel, I'm so exhausted that I do not know whether it's morning or whether it's afternoon or whether it's night. So notice, we are all of us in the same storm, but we are in different boats. Jesus was in the same storm and in the same boat. And so, how do we respond? Because we are privileged and blessed to be in the catamarans, we need to express our concern for those in the dinghies and those on the raft and those without a paddle. In my day, is there even one thing that I do for someone else? To be sure, it is not safe to go out, and I do not advise you, if you are frightened, I do not advise you to go out. But without going out, there are so many things that you can do, even from within. You can decide that you are going to give some small part of your meal to someone else. And there are many, many people who will be very happy to deliver that meal if you make a payment to them. So even if one person is fed, even if one person is fed every day because of you, because of your generosity, that is quite a lot, quite a lot. So nobody is asking you to do great things, but this will be a reminder to you of your own privileged position, of your own life that you're leading. Otherwise, there is a danger that as seminarians, as priests, we lose touch with reality. There is a danger that we go into our ivory towers and we lock the door of our ivory towers and we live there comfortably as wonderful bachelors. No one else is concerned. And so Jesus shows us how we must respond. We respond with concern, we respond with serenity, we respond with calm. And even though we behave often like the disciples, accusing Jesus of a non-caring attitude, Jesus gets up. He is actually awake. When I say he's actually awake, I do not mean that he did not sleep, but he is aware. And what is awareness? Not the awareness of a wakeful person, no, but the awareness that he has done all that is required. And for the sake of the disciples, because they have to be taught as a master teaches little children, as a teacher teaches little children, he gives them this lesson. And the lesson is first to rebuke the wind and the sea and the intervention of Jesus. Now notice the great windstorm, that term which Mark used to show how powerful the windstorm was, the great windstorm, is now transformed into a dead calm. And once Jesus has done that, then he points to the disciples' lack of faith and fear. So there is a connection between fear and lack of faith or no faith. A faithful person, a person who is filled with faith, cannot be frightened. So if you are frightened, it means that there is no faith. So Jesus interprets their fear to have its origin in the lack of faith or in their no faith at all. And that's why the questions which Jesus asks them are about both fear and about faith. Why did you doubt? So when we look in summary form at the response of the disciples, notice they interpret this also as a miracle because they are filled with awe. And awe in this particular context is not so much a positive awe, but an awe which leads to the questions. So they interpret this even later when Jesus walks on water. They will interpret this more as a miracle rather than as a revelation of the parables which Jesus told. And actually, this mighty work ought to have been interpreted as the parables in action, as the parables in lesson, as the parables being taught. But the disciples somehow are not able to pick up this lesson. They still interpret this as a miracle. And the disciples' attitude is therefore to be agitated, to be disturbed, to be frightened. And contrasted with that, the attitude of Jesus is to be calm, to be serene, and to be peaceful. The disciples are awake, but they are doing nothing. Or even, to be honest with you, they are rocking the boat even further, if one could talk in those terms. Jesus is asleep, but actually he's doing everything. The founder of the Society of Jesus used to say this, and I would like to believe that it summarizes very beautifully what the miracle or actually lesson of the storm on the lake is, namely, when you work, that is, when you're doing what you are meant to do, work as if everything depends only on you. So I do not talk to God at that time. I do not depend on God, because the danger is I might use God as a crutch for the things which I can do. So when you work as if everything, whatever I am doing, depends only on me. So I am in charge. I am in control. I have to do this. If I don't do it, nobody else will do it. And once you have done all that is required of you, then of course, you pray as if everything depends only on God. So I have done, but just because I have done does not mean that the results will be as I expect. All of my wonderful effort, all of my talent, all of my capability, all of my ability might come to naught, might come to nothing. Then I pray, Lord, let it be according to your will. The next scene is the scene of the Gersasene demoniac. And the reason why I put it in two parts, chapter 5, verses 1 to 13, and then 14 to 20, is because this part, if you like, ends, you might say, the miracle where the swine were drowned in the lake. In the next part, basically, there is the response to the miracle. In the next part, there is the response to the miracle, and that's why I've taken the next part separately, namely the response which the swineherds tell the people and the response of the people. So what can we say about the miracle of the Gersasene demoniac? The movement of Jesus to the other side, they are in the boat, remember? The movement of Jesus to the other side is for now the new miracle which Mark wants to bring. And we enter now the region of the Gerasenes, which we can already say is a place of the Gentiles. Because there are pigs, there are swine. The Jews considered swine unclean, and so it was not likely that a place which was Jewish would have swine. This miracle, it seems to be a combination of many things, and therefore here in chapter 5 verse 2, the demon encounters Jesus first time, and then later again the demon encounters him in chapter 5 verse 6. The man has come out of the tomb, and we saw in our structure, demons dwell in tombs. They are places where demons dwell. In the next two verses, 3 and 4, the man's position, his physical condition is described, and the fact that he has to be pushed out of from society. While lepers were pushed out of society from the point of view of making sure that they did not obstruct others, this man is pushed out from society physically because he was a danger physically. So he is a danger both to himself and he is a danger to others. And because he is a danger to others, he will be pushed out of society. No matter what was done to him, whether restricting him with chains or any other kind of trying to control him, that was unsuccessful. And up to verse 5, we are given the 4 characteristics which determine whether a person was in his or her frame of mind or was insane. So anyone who ran at night, spent the night in a cemetery, tore one's own garments and destroyed what had been given, seemed to indicate a person who was out of his or her mind. The bowing when he comes to Jesus, and this is the second encounter with Jesus, the first was in chapter 5 verse 2, is an indication that he recognizes that Jesus is now going to destroy him, that Jesus is his superior. And this is why the moment Jesus is encountered, the question, what do we have in common? We might remember in chapter 1, verses 23 to 28, in the first miracle, which was an exorcism, the demons there, even though there was one unclean spirit, spoke in the plural to indicate that Jesus had come to finish up the demonic kingdom. Here, it could be the same. However, later we realize that in this case, there is not simply one demon, but there are many demons, as the demon will give the name. When the demon takes the name, it is an indication that the demon wants to control Jesus. It knows who Jesus is, but it also indicates that it is aware of the power of Jesus, Son of the Most High God. It is in this Son of the Most High God that we are told that this term appears only here in the New Testament, Son of the Most High God. So very clearly, it seems that this is a Gentile story, and later it will be also confirmed when we are introduced to the presence of pigs. The question of the demons is that they want to respond but they respond by telling Jesus a general name, legion. Now, this term legion, some interpret the term legion to refer to a dig against the Romans, because the legion also referred to a number of Roman soldiers bound together. So if that is the case, then the name legion seems to be a dig against the Roman cavalry, Roman infantry. Another interpretation of legion is that the demon does not want to give its name and so uses the general term legion. And yet another interpretation is that the legion is given because the demons were in fact many, as is confirmed later on when they go into 2,000 swine. The spirit, the unclean spirit, is very clearly inferior to Jesus, and then it makes a request for a concession. Now, even though it seems on the surface level that the concession is being given, on the deeper level, there is no concession, because later the swine are drowned. So already the swine mentioned here, and the concession which is given is actually seen towards the end of the miracle to be a trick played on the demon. And in literature of that time, that is what exorcists would do, would play a trick on the demon, would trick the demon into doing something which the demon thought would be a concession, but later on was actually a total destruction. The fact that the concession is given allows the man to be free and the demons to be destroyed. And so the whole herd of swine are drowned, and they go back to the place to which they belong, that is the waters of the deep. In Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 to 5, when John writes about the new heaven and the new earth, what he is writing about is there will be no more sea. The reason why there will be no more sea is because the sea is the abode of evil. Demons lurk in the waters. And that's why this demon goes to the sea, goes to the place to which it belongs. The demons belong in the sea, not on land, not on earth. The swine herds react to the exorcism itself, and they are taken up. The swineherds then go and communicate to the inhabitants what has happened to the man. And then the people come, and the response of the people is, because they see that this man who really could not be controlled is now calm, they are unable to understand what would have happened. And even though the man is healed, the inhabitants of the town do not see this in a positive light. And that is why they request Jesus to leave their place. They look at Jesus. They have not encountered Jesus. Only the Gersasene demoniac has encountered him. The swineherds have communicated what happened. And so it is understandable that the inhabitants of the town would react in this manner, because fear would have overtaken them. First of all, the destruction of the swine. Secondly, the transformation of this man. They would only believe that possibly a magician, somebody with extraordinary powers, could effect this kind of transformation. However, that did not lead them to faith. It led them to make a request to Jesus to leave their place. The man, however, who has experienced, makes a request to be a disciple. Notice, he wants to be with Jesus, the same term which Mark used in chapter 3, verse 14. Jesus sat down on the mountain, called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him to be with him. So this Gersasene demoniac who is healed wants to become a disciple. However, Jesus realizes that he is not the one to be a disciple. He is not called, but because he is not called to be a disciple, does not mean that he cannot be an apostle. We notice in chapter 3, verses 31 to 35, when Jesus spoke about his family, he regarded those of his family as one who did the will of God. And so this man, even though he may not be called to be a disciple, is called to be an apostle. And Jesus asks him to announce what God had done. The man, however, is able to see God in Jesus. And so for him, what the Lord had done becomes what Jesus has done. And the response of the people is that they are amazed, possibly because they knew this man when he was possessed, and also because they see the transformation now, and also because of the man's proclamation.